Considered by many to be one of his generation's greatest actors, he's always willing to take risks and has created some very memorable characters. From The Usual Suspects to American Beauty to playing Bobby Darin in Beyond the Sea, he creates these roles with depth and believability. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on Interviews, our conversation with Tony and two-time Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey. Is it more challenging for you to do someone who was a living person or to create a character from scratch?
Well, you feel a responsibility. I mean, I've had the experience a couple of times. I did a PBS television movie about Clarence Darrow, and I played a real character in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. So you do feel a responsibility that you want to try to be as accurate as you can with a person's essence. But almost in all of the cases that I've experienced, I didn't want to feel trapped by doing an out-and-out slavish imitation. I think we've seen films where it feels like the actors were so self-conscious about wanting to get every single gesture or vocal quality or walk, or that actually it ends up not having a life to it. And in the case of Bobby Darin, this is one of the most remarkable performers with energy and style and a kind of arrogance to him and cockiness to him that in a way it had to come from me in order for it to, I think, not be hollow. And at some point along the way, along this journey over the last 5 years of trying to get the music right and his performance aspects right, our music producer, Phil Ramone, who's kind of legendary in his own right, had worked with Bobby Darin, worked with Sinatra, did all of Simon & Garfunkel's albums. He says at some point I stopped trying to do an imitation of Bobby, because that's sort of where you begin. He says at some point I started using my own instincts as a performer, and when I did that, the register in my voice lowered, it got deeper, and I started to just trust myself. But by that point I'd watched so much of Bobby, listened to so much, that he was in me in a way, or there's a version of Bobby Darin that I do, because I do feel that I have to make this kind of misquote of Senator Benson, I knew Bobby Darin, you're no Bobby Darin. For people who haven't seen him, he really was one of the last great all-around entertainers that I think we've ever had. And only because he died so young at the age of 37, I think his legacy is dissipated as it is today. So, quite frankly, our hope in doing this movie, and my hope in doing this performance, is that we can turn the spotlight back onto him.
What was it about him, though, that caught your attention?
It all started with my mother. My mother was a big Bobby Darin fan. I'm sure like a lot of mothers out there who were my mother's age or younger. He was also a guy who I think he hit a lot of different genres of music. So he hit a lot of different, he hit kids when he was in rock and roll, and then he hit adults when he did pop music, and then he hit a different audience when he did folk or country western or gospel, and then he hit a whole other audience when he did protest songs against the war. I think his work is timeless. Tony Bennett recently was asked, why do you think you've endured so long? And he said, because I've never sung to a demographic. I sing to everybody. And I think Bobby Darin sang to everybody, but in a very brief 15-year career. And I think his style, he just had a way around words. He had a phrasing that I think was probably his best quality as a singer. There are other singers that had purer voices. Sinatra is probably the purest of those saloon guys. But Bobby had something that none of them had. And part of that was his diversity, and part of that was the range of his talent. I mean, he not only wrote his own songs and sang his guts out, but he did impressions, he danced, he was an actor, he played the drums, the vibes, the harmonica, the guitar, the piano. I mean, he was this dynamo in this very small package. Yeah. Because he was shorter than I am. And he had, I think, less hair than I do. I'm not entirely sure. We don't have that kind of entertainer anymore. We also don't really have the venue. I think that must have been, we try to portray this in the movie a little bit, the watching his venue disappear, nightclubs, for a time in the United States and around the world, were the premier place of entertainment. You know, people got dressed up, they went out to these smoky rooms, they watched somebody sing their guts out for 2 hours. We got jazz clubs now, and thank God we still have them. But I think the music industry noticed that they could make more money in big arenas and concerts and stadiums. And Bobby never wanted to play those. He always liked the intimate clubs. And I hope, you know, who knows, maybe all that stuff will come back.
What surprised me about the film was you're doing all your own singing.
Yes.
How much of a love of music do you have?
Well, what people don't know about me is that I started out doing musicals. From the time I was 13 till I was in my 20s, I basically did more musicals than anything else. I did Damn Yankees and West Side Story and Gypsy and The Boyfriend and Dames at Sea and Sound of Music. So I have always been a song and dance man in my heart. I've just never had a chance professionally to display that. And to me it was, I think the most important aspect of this film was the music. If we didn't get the music right, then it didn't really matter what else we got right. And so we started working on the music back in 1999 and just consistently have been testing myself, stretching my talent, pushing my voice to get within Bobby's range and also get within the way he attacked a song. And we were very blessed because Darin's family, both Sandra Dee, Dodd Darin, their son, and Steve Blauner, who's the character that John Goodman plays in the movie, who was Bobby's manager. They got behind this movie to such a degree that they actually went into Bobby's archives and they located all of his original arrangements and charts and they sent them to me, and that's what we laid down at Abbey Road a year ago. So note for note, except for the sections we expanded for the big dance sequences that we do, our big MGM homage, it's note for note what Bobby did.
Wow. Is there a fear in you putting yourself out there like that? That what if the audience doesn't accept me? Or are you past that?
I mean, I've already lived through, in the last 5 years, I think something that Bobby lived through that I didn't quite understand as much as I do now, which is the dilemma between professional expectations and personal freedom. You know, Bobby did a lot of things in his career that were probably detrimental to his outward career, but he was following his heart. And I think at the end of the day, you have to follow your heart. You know, I've experienced, after American Beauty, I did a whole series of films that critics savagely attacked, and almost in a kind of, how dare you try this? And I find that, you know, strange, only because I think that's what the job of an actor is to test yourself and to go to new places and to try new things. But I would hear these things of, oh, we don't like our Kevin Spacey that way. We like him this way. And, you know, that's certainly the dilemma that a lot of artists face, is that people prefer the early stuff. But who are you going to live for?
Yeah.
You know, I got to get up in the morning and face the day. And if I can't test myself, if I can't stretch my talent, if I can't walk into new areas, if I only ever do what's convenient or comfortable or I could make a lot of money doing, showing up, doing the same old turn, we got enough of those people.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I think after a while, audiences start to lose their excitement. I'd much rather test myself, and if I fail on my terms.
There was a story I read, and never knowing how much is accurate or not accurate, about you were on the lot of some film and walked by and saw one actor who had a bunch of Rolls Royces out in front of their trailer.
Oh, no, that's a true story, actually. That was when I was making a film called Dad with Jack Lemmon. It was the third time that we worked together, and we would eventually do one more film together. Jack never allowed Hollywood glory to go to his head. He was one of the sweetest, kindest, hardest working actors that you'd ever come across. And Jack had a little trailer, like a little star trailer, not a big anything, just a little star trailer, and his door was usually open. He was in there in his underwear doing the crossword puzzle. And across the way was a big, big star with a Winnebago and 9 golf carts and 13 bodyguards and 12 chefs, and you couldn't get near that trailer. And, you know, just looking at those two things and saying, well, which life do I want? I think I'd rather have that one. And that's how I'm leading my life.
Do you give up things to have this life?
I think you always make choices in life, you know. I mean, I am, I guess, in many ways like Bobby. Performing has been my life. It's all I've ever known. It's all I've ever done. I've been blessed that I've been given opportunities to do all kinds of different things. You know, I'm running a theater now in London, the Old Vic, which is not something I ever imagined I would end up doing. So I'm reinventing myself yet again. The things that you give up, you know, I think everybody gives up things in life. You know, everyone finds a way to live their life and compromise the things that, you know, others might have in abundance, but you may have less of. But at the end of the day, I believe the good so far outweighs the bad that, you know, it's worth whatever those sacrifices are.
Talk to me a little bit about the discipline of acting. And why I bring that up is I think to myself, you're making this movie, and you're directing it, and you're producing it, and you've worked many years to bring it to the screen. When that camera rolls and they say, act, how do you get away from all of that, all of the thoughts, the budgets, the overrides, to get into the character to actually present it?
Well, you don't do it alone. In this case, it was easier than I ever imagined it would be when I set out, because I didn't intend on directing the movie originally. It fell to me over time. It's because of this remarkable crew. You know, when you're surrounded by people who believe in what you're doing, who believe in what they're doing, and who believe in the concept of this film, which they did, the confidence that you get from them. I mean, every day, I was mostly worried on this movie, would I ever be able to sleep? Because my mind was always going, you know, thinking about what we did, what's coming up. But because this group dedicated themselves to this film, because they believed in it, because I didn't want to fail them every day, because we went through 4.5 months where we lost our financing, we had to refinance the whole film. We went through 5 weeks where the crew wasn't getting paid, and I had to end up paying the crew. We didn't have money when we laid down all the musical tracks, and I had to pay for that in order to make sure it got done. I was so inspired by everyone who came onto this film and picked up my dream and made it theirs, that all of that difficulty and all of those kind of worries just disappeared. It's almost as if the day we started shooting, all of that anxiety that I went through, instead of it coming on top of me and crushing me, it went underneath me and lifted me up, and I had the funnest time I've ever had in my life.
What about that in general? When you're working on any project, how do you turn off life to give you room to do the character?
A lot of it depends on the environment you're in, and a lot of it depends on whether you trust the person at the helm. Now, I've been lucky. I've worked with some remarkable directors, but I've also worked with some tossers. And, you know, I keep getting asked, you know, what was it like to direct yourself for the first time? And I say,
I won't
well,
ask, I promise.
It might be the first time I've directed myself officially. But the truth is, you learn how to save yourself in situations where you realize that the person at the helm doesn't even know where the deck is.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate, but it's true that there's a lot of people who, you know, rise to the top in any industry who, quite frankly, aren't qualified. But I've been fortunate that most of my experiences have been with remarkable directors. So a lot of it is the environment. You know, if you have a director and a producing staff who understand, if you create a great environment, if you allow people to do their best work, if you are able to describe to them what you're looking for, then you feel trust, and then you feel free, and then you can let go of all those anxieties and be in the moment, which is what acting is all about. It's about listening more than anything else. And if there's a lot of noise in your head, then it's hard to listen. But I've had most of my experiences in film and theater have been relatively easy in terms of getting to that place you need to be at when that camera rolls and you want that magic to happen. Or as Jack Lemmon used to say, magic time.
Are you one of those people who can be living your life and then the moment the camera rolls you jump into character and then you back out, or is it more of a process for you?
Sometimes it depends on the role, and sometimes it depends on what you're shooting and when you're shooting it. Sometimes you have to stay in a certain emotional place, perhaps for a couple of days while you do a sequence. But I'm one of those who I like to hang up the character at the end of the day along with the costume. I don't take it home with me. I don't live with it. I mean, this one I've lived with because it involves so much of me and because so much of it was about performance. But most of the time I like to sort of hang up the hat at the end of the day.
I'm curious what it's like the first time you step on the Broadway stage.
Terrifying.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember my first opening night. My first Broadway play was Ghosts with Lee Volman, and I was 20 years old, playing Oswald. It was a big part. John Madden was the original director of that production, who went on later to do Shakespeare in Love. But he got fired halfway through, and not because he wasn't good. And that was a tough one because I believed so much in John and was so sad to see him get fired. And that was a tough one. It was very nerve-wracking, you know. I mean, there you are on Broadway for the first time. But I later on played, you know, more plays on Broadway and had a much better time in the sense of I was more confident with my own work, and I was working with a wonderful company. And, you know, I got to do Neil Simon's Lost in Yonkers and then Long Day's Journey with Jack, and eventually came to Broadway with Iceman Cometh. So I've had a wonderful time in New York, and the theater has always been my primary allegiance. So for me to be now running the Old Vic is just a huge thrill. I can't wait to get back up on stage. We're going to do a play called National Anthems first, the third play of our first season, and then we're going to do the Philadelphia Story after that.
Tell me a little bit about how you got involved with the Old Vic.
Well, it started with the Iceman Cometh. When we transferred from the Almeida to the Old Vic, I had probably the greatest experience I've had working in a theater. It is a remarkably great theater for actors. It's because of the shape of the theater itself. It's a horseshoe shape, so there's no balcony that juts out, and so vocally it is an incredibly easy theater. I mean, it still takes an effort, but I never lost my voice at the Old Vic, and I've lost my voice at practically every other theater I've worked at. Also, the history there. I mean, it's been standing there since 1818. It's where John Gielgud made his debut, Peter O'Toole, Richard Burton. Laurence Olivier ran it for 13 seasons when the National Theatre was there. Judi Dench made her debut there. So its history is in the building. You feel it. The spirits of these great artists is there. And I was on the committee to help them try to find someone to run the theater. And then one day I thought, what are you doing? You know, it's staring you in the face that this is something you've wanted to do your entire life. And so as close to Dick Cheney as I'll ever get, I ended up putting myself on the list of candidates, and now I'm running it.
What do you bring to it, do you think?
Well, I think there's something interesting about being an American running a British theater. Mm-hmm. I hope that the ability that I might have as a magnet for actors and directors and writers to come and work at this theater will be substantial. And I hope that in the long run I have something to do with revitalizing the theater for its future. You know, I don't want the theater just to be successful while I'm there. I'm trying to, everything I do is thinking about a successor. Everything I do is about what happens in 5 years, 10 years when I'm done there, to make sure that the theater isn't only successful while I'm there, but that it continues to be a vital producing house.
In theater in general, what's going on Broadway and all the Disneyization of Broadway and all of the big musical things, does that hurt theater today, do you think, or does it help?
Well, I think any time there's a big success, it's good for the theater, because people go and have a good time in the theater. I mean, if people love musicals, a lot of people love musicals, then I think that helps other things, because that means that people might have a good time at the theater and they want to go see something else. Anytime there's a hit play, I think it helps the rest of the community. Look, all you have to do is look off-Broadway and realize that some of the best work is done off-Broadway. And sometimes it's fortunate that they raise the money to move it to Broadway. Sometimes they're very smart and leave it right where it is. And you look at some of the regional theaters around this country where some remarkable new writing is discovered, and playwrights come out of there and eventually go to New York. I think, you know, it's very funny to me how the theater is always referred to as dying. You know, it's the theater's dying, and movies are never dying, books are never dying, television's never dying. It's just the theater that's dying, and yet somehow it manages to survive all of these death knells. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's harder now to compete for an audience that goes to the movies and watches television and stuff, but I think as long as there are writers who are writing courageous work and interesting work and entertaining work, and as long as there are producers who are willing to take a risk, theater's going to be alive and well.
Can your name become too big to allow you to do the work you want to do?
Not if I have anything to do with it. I think you have to try as best you can to control, and within limits, because there's a whole lot of stuff out there that you have nothing to do with. I mean, you know, you can disappear for 2 years and suddenly, you know, you're still somehow out there. You know, I try very hard to control the amount of stuff that I participate in. I don't like being referred to as a celebrity. I don't like being referred to as a Hollywood star. It's a disservice to what I do. It is a convenient, you know, I hear this all the time. So how different is it to live in Hollywood than to live in London? And I go, I don't live in Hollywood. I've lived in New York since I was 19 years old. But it's an easy and I think lazy journalism. The fact of the matter is I'm an actor. I'm now an artistic director of a theater. Now, will they ever actually treat me that way? Probably not, because in their minds it's easier to call me a Hollywood star. But I'm an actor. I'm an actor who happens to do movies. I'm a slug who's done relatively well in film. Surprise, surprise. But my attitude is not that. And my attitude is I want to do the best work that I can. And if all the good fortune that's happened to me in film, I can turn that around and use it as a magnet for theater, then that's great. I'm doing something useful with it. I want to continue to do the best job that I can do with what I've been given and take advantage of all the good fortune that's happened to me in the right way and not the wrong way. And so I'm hoping that I can just stay on that course.
If you could rearrange things in your life a little, would you have debuted on Broadway later in your career? Would you have had as big a success with American Beauty at a different point? Or are you comfortable with where it all happened?
You can't, it's so speculative, I mean, the fact of the matter is this is the way it went down. And, I've had such an extraordinary journey. And a big part of me feels like I'm just getting started, People sometimes ask me, what's your favorite film? And I say, I hope I haven't made it yet.
If you had, would that darken the rest of your career for you as an artist?
Yeah, I think anytime you think you've done your best work, you ought to open a shoe shop, because you always hope your best work is ahead of you. And to me, it has to be. Or why get out of bed in the morning?
Yeah. What keeps you going then? Looking for that pearl?
People. I have enormous love and affection and faith in people. And that's what keeps me going. The human beings keep me going. I am so inspired by people I meet, by remarkable work, by people who keep moving forward in a world in which it's increasingly, we live in a very cynical, very temporal time. And there are still great people, and there are still great people who love to be entertained, who love to be moved. And I do it for them.
Did you lose any faith in people with all that we've seen happen since 9/11 and all of that? Did that darken it at all for you? And were you in New York when that happened?
I wasn't in New York, but I was in New York as fast as I could get there after. No, actually, I think that that inspired me to see how not just New Yorkers, who are a unique and extraordinary breed, rose to the challenge of reclaiming their city, and how the people around the world, their affection for America, and not just Americans, because we lost a lot of foreigners on that day. I believe that we showed those who were against us what we're made of. And I believe that we have a lot more work to do, and I believe we have a lot more healing to do. But I've been inspired by everything that we as a people have tried to do. I don't necessarily agree with every decision our administration has made, but I do think that you can't fault the people. And what I have discovered living abroad is that people do make a distinction between Americans and an administration. I get asked this question, you feel a lot of anti-Americanism, and I say no. In fact, I don't at all. And I don't think you see it even in Middle Eastern countries. I talk to a lot of journalists who go to Middle Eastern countries who say, no, there's a distinction. If people are upset about an administration's policies, they're not upset and hate Americans. I think that's false. I think they recognize that America is a good place, and at its heart wants to do the right thing.
Yeah. I'm going to take you back to your movie for a minute and say, I've heard you're touring. You'll go out there and you'll sing with an orchestra and do the whole thing?
I am. I'm taking a 10-city tour with a 19-piece big band. Roger Calloway is leading it. Greg Field, who was Sinatra's drummer for the last 10 years, is keeping the beat. Phil Ramone is back producing. And the great fun of it is I'm getting a chance to do a lot of Bobby's work that I couldn't fit into the movie, some of my favorite stuff of Bobby's. And we're going to San Francisco, L.A., Boston, Atlantic City, Miami, Chicago, New York, and it's all ending at the Wayne Newton Theater at the Stardust Hotel in Las Vegas.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
And you know what? We're ending right here. Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Thank you.
Kevin Spacey. To order a transcript, call 866-652-3378 or send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.